The first setting we will be taking a look at is Animate Portrait. Animate Portrait does exactly what the name suggests. While we are in-game, this will animate the portrait of your selected character. In my testing, this has no performance difference whatsoever, and therefore it's more of a personal preference whether you would like to use it or not. I do want to mention that if you have a very low-end system, it might have a few FPS in performance difference, but for everyone else I wouldn't expect this to make any difference. For my recommendations, since it is more of a personal preference, I would just recommend to leave this enabled. The next setting we will take a look at is Additive Light Paths. Additive Light Paths will add some extra lighting effects to the different characters inside the game. As you can see here in my example, this does not impact your performance whatsoever, and only has a slight impact on the characters themselves, where the lighting looks slightly better while you have it enabled compared to having it disabled. For my recommendation, I would recommend to leave this enabled, since it doesn't make any performance difference and it does make the characters look slightly better. Now let's take a look at world lighting. World lighting will add some extra lighting effects to the world. In my example, there's a few different ways that you can see this. First of all, if you look in the top left corner, you can see with the fire, it looks a lot better while we have world lighting enabled compared to disabled, where we get some extra lighting effects and we can really see the light coming from the fire emitting onto the objects that are nearby to it. Secondly, you can also see it on my character, which also gets a bit brighter looking, and generally the light emitting from my character looks a lot better. And lastly, you can also see it from the blue light emitted from the bottom of my example, where you can see that it does look slightly brighter and looks like it's emitting more light when it's enabled compared to when it's disabled. For my recommendation, I would recommend to leave this enabled, as it does make the game look slightly better, and it doesn't cost you any performance while doing so. Now let's take a look at ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion will add some extra soft shadows into small crevices inside the game. This is most noticeable with the different vegetation inside the game. So especially in the bushes and the grass, you're able to see that ambient occlusion will add some extra soft shadows, generally making the lighting in the game look a lot better. This does, however, come with a cost of around 7% of our performance. However, I actually think that it's worth it, because while you have ambient occlusion disabled, the game looks very bland, bright and boring, to be honest. So therefore, if you can stomach the 7% performance loss, I would highly recommend to use this setting and have it enabled. Next up, we got normal maps. Normal maps will do two things. First of all, in itself, it will add some extra detail and some extra lighting effects to the different ground textures inside the game. It will also allow you to use ground parallax, which is the next setting that we will cover. So to have ground parallax enabled, you also need to have normal maps enabled. If we firstly just look at normal maps at itself, we can see that it does make a small difference in quality. However, once you're in game, you won't really notice that quality difference. And since we also lose around 5% of our performance, so far I would recommend to leave this disabled. Now let's take a look at ground parallax. First of all, it's important to mention that to even enable ground parallax, you need to have normal maps enabled first. Ground parallax will add some extra depth to the ground textures, making them look a bit more 3D and a bit more realistic. The effect is very sudden and very difficult to showcase in a video. If you combine that with the around 3 to 4% performance that we lose, I would highly recommend to leave this disabled as well as normal maps, because either of these two only affect the ground textures and it's rare that you would actually notice a difference while playing the game. Now let's take a look at ambient creatures. Ambient creatures will add some extra small creatures around the map to give it a bit more of an ambient feel. So this can be butterflies, birds, fireflies, bats, and etc. depending on the location of the map you're standing in. Since this setting only has a small impact on the quality of the game and only a small impact on the performance as well of around 3%, this is more of a personal preference whether you would like to have these creatures in the game or not, but my own recommendation would be to leave them enabled as I quite like it. Next up we got Ambient Clothes Simulation. Ambient Clothes Simulation will simulate the different clothes both on the characters but also the banners to better depict the way it would move in real life if there were some wind or an explosion or anything similar like that that could impact it. However, in my testing I have not been able to find any noticeable difference, both in terms of the quality of the game but also in terms of the performance. Therefore, I would recommend to simply just leave this disabled. Now let's take a look at grass. Grass will add some extra grass around the different fields inside the game. In my testing, this has a very small performance difference of around 2 to maybe 3% performance that you lose when you enable it. In terms of quality, it does make a small difference when you add the extra grass. However, when you're playing the game, you probably won't even notice the difference, and therefore I would recommend to just leave this disabled. Next up we got anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing will smooth out jagged edges inside the game to give you a much clearer and crisper image to look at. I have tested this both in 1080p, 1440p and 4K because my recommendation will differentiate depending on the resolution you're playing in. If we firstly take a look at 1080p, here if you look at the character you can see that we do have a fairly clear difference between having this disabled and having it enabled. Therefore I would recommend at this resolution to have anti-aliasing enabled. If we then look at 1440p, here the lines are starting to blur in a way where actually we can, if we really look for it, we can see a small difference between having this disabled and having it enabled. But since it's such a small difference, I doubt you'll notice it in game, and therefore I would actually recommend to leave it disabled. And if we lastly take a look at 4K, here I can't see any difference between having this disabled or having it enabled. And therefore I would simply just recommend for you to leave it disabled. Next up we got specular. Specular affects the lighting of certain lighting sources inside the game. As you can see, this has a very big performance hit, especially where I'm currently standing, because we have so many different lighting sources that it can affect. In terms of quality, you can first of all see the difference in the grass. So if you look at the grass beneath my character, you can see that we get some extra lighting while we have this enabled, compared to while we have it disabled. You can also see that it does make a slight difference to my character as well, even though that is fairly hard to notice. And it also makes a slight difference in the hovering totem poles, where you can also see that it gets a bit extra lighting while we have it enabled, compared to while we have it disabled. Overall, this has a very small difference in the quality of the game, where I doubt that you would really notice the difference if you are just playing the game. And since it also has such a big performance hit, I would recommend for you to leave this disabled. Now let's take a look at specular and light bloom. Specular and light bloom is another setting that affects the lighting inside the game. I had a really tough time finding any location where I could see any noticeable difference between having this disabled and having it enabled. I ended up recording and testing this area in specific because I noticed that I had quite a big performance difference between having it disabled and having it enabled. Even though the quality difference was fairly low, actually so low that I couldn't really notice any quality difference. The only thing that I did notice was that it seemed to be a bit brighter when I had it enabled compared to have it disabled, but that was the only thing. Therefore, since I can't seem to find any quality difference between having this enabled and disabled, I would recommend to leave it disabled. Now let's take a look at high quality water. High quality water makes the water in the game looks a lot better. As you can see, while we have this enabled, we suddenly get some reflections in the water from the trees around the water. The water also becomes more transparent, and we also get some extra fish swimming around. Generally the water looks a lot nicer while we have this enabled compared to when we have it disabled. This quality does however also come at a hefty cost at around 16% of performance difference between having this disabled and having it enabled. Therefore, unless you really like the way the water look and unless you have a lot of performance to spare, I would recommend to leave this disabled. Next up we got atmospheric fog/caustics. Atmospheric fog will control the fog effect that you are able to see on the map at nighttime. So this will only affect the gameplay at nighttime. This can be very difficult to showcase, if not impossible, on YouTube, but I promise that there is a noticeable difference between having this disabled and having it enabled. In my testing I only found a 4% performance difference, and therefore this is more of a personal preference, whether you like it or not. As I do like the setting and feel like it adds a lot to the atmosphere of the game, I would recommend to leave this enabled. Now let's take a look at high quality dashboard. High quality dashboard is supposed to make a difference in the quality on the dashboard, also known as the home screen. In my testing I have not been able to find any quality difference between having this disabled or having it enabled. And since this only affects your dashboard and not while you are in game, I would recommend to just leave this enabled. Now let's take a look at tree wind. Tree wind will control whether or not the leaves of the different trees inside the game will move accordingly to the wind. So while we have this disabled, you can see that the leaves on the trees are standing completely still. And while we have it enabled, you can see that the leaves on the trees are moving accordingly to the wind. This has a very small both quality difference but also performance difference, where we lose around 3 to 4% of our performance having this enabled. However, like I said, this also has a very small quality difference, since I doubt that you will really notice whether or not the leaves on the trees are moving while you're playing the game. Therefore, this is also an easy setting to leave at disable and save those 3 to 4% of performance. Next up we got compute shaders. Compute shaders is a different setting compared to the other ones that I've tested, since this one does not affect the graphics or the quality of the game at all, and it only affects the different kind of tasks that's going on in the background by your graphics card. So without going into too many details around what compute shaders are, because that could be in a video in itself, enabling or disabling this setting changes the way that your graphics card handles compute shaders. And this might or may not give you a performance increase. So therefore this is on a case by case basis, where you simply have to try it out on your specific system and your specific specs to figure out whether you're going to lose performance, gain performance, or if nothing happens. So therefore the only recommendation I can give for this setting is to try it out. Now let's take a look at texture quality. Texture quality will determine the quality of the different textures used inside the game. So these will be the textures for the different buildings inside the game, for the different characters, for some of the ground textures, and so on. In my testing you can see that we both have a big difference in performance, but also a big difference in quality, going from low and all the way up to high. From my initial results, medium seems to be a really good balance between quality and performance, since the quality definitely increases and the game looks a lot better going from low to mid, but our performance only decreases with around 2%. Therefore, I would recommend to use the mid option, as this seems to be the best balance between the performance and the quality of the game. Now let's take a look at the effects quality. The effects quality controls the quality of the different effects inside the game. So these effects will mostly come from the different characters inside the game and from the abilities that they are casting. So you can see here in my example, I'm continuously casting the same ability over and over again to try to see if I can find any noticeable quality difference between low, mid and high, but also to see what kind of performance difference we might find. From my testing, both from the example that I'm showcasing and other examples that I've also tested in the game, I have not been able to find any place where this makes any noticeable quality difference, even though we do lose up to 4% of our performance. Another thing to consider is that this is just with one character casting one ability. If you have a big battle where you have the whole team or both full teams are attacking one another, you will have a lot more abilities being casted at once, which could potentially hurt your performance. Keeping that in mind, and also keeping in mind that I couldn't find any quality difference, I would simply recommend to leave this at low. Next up we got shadow quality. Shadow quality controls the quality of the different shadows inside the game. Here we have 4 options to choose from. Off will simply disable any shadow inside the game. When we go up to mid, our characters and the regular minions get their shadows back. Once we go up to high, the courier and the landscapes, so the different trees, also get their shadows back. And at ultra we get some more shadows again, but these are lesser visible shadows. So they kind of remind me of some sort of an ambient occlusion shadows that you get back. So in crevices and around smaller objects, you suddenly also get shadows. So as you go up higher, you get more and more shadows inside the game. This does, however, also come with a hefty performance cost of around up to 13% going from having this disabled and all the way up to ultra. But shadows and lighting in general is one of the more important aspects of a game and more important aspect of the quality of the game, making it look nice. Therefore, I would actually recommend to use the high option, because you have to go all the way up to the high option to get the shadows from the different trees enabled. And those make a big difference in the way that the game is perceived and played. Without those, the game just looks very bright and very bland. So if you can stomach the 10% performance loss, I would highly recommend to use the high option. And lastly, let's take a look at Rendering API. Rendering API enables you to select which API you want to use in Dota. What the API does is that it will enable your system and the game to talk better together, to utilize your resources from your system better, and to give you a better experience when you're playing. I've tested DirectX 11 versus Vulkan in my example here. And as you can see right off the bat, I lose around 5% going from DirectX 11 to Vulkan. But what is actually worse is that I was having some horrible stutters while playing with Vulkan on, which I did not experience with DirectX 11. One last thing to notice is also just that it can be different depending on the systems. Some systems will play more nicely with Vulkan than mine does, so you can always try it out and see if you get better performance. But if you don't, then just stick with DirectX 11, that works just fine. Here are my own custom settings, which are based off the recommendations I have made throughout the video. Thank you all for watching. If you have made it this far and been able to use this video to get better FPS in Dota 2, please like and subscribe for future videos where we'll take a look at other games. If you had any feedback on the video or any other tips or tricks to get more FPS in Dota 2, please share them in the comments below. If you're interested in these kinds of videos, maybe check out the video I made on Valorant. Have a nice day. Bye bye.